James sat on the porch, looking at his daughter, Sophia, as she played in the yard. Sophia, born with a disability, faced more challenges in her young life than most could understand. She was often misunderstood by those around her, but James and his wife had always done everything they could to create a loving and protective environment for her. Their home was a sanctuary where Sophia could feel safe and be herself, surrounded by the care and support of her parents. James often wondered how long it would be before the outside world, with all its prejudice and judgment, would come knocking on their door. The neighborhood they lived in was supposed to be a place of peace, but there was always a sense of unease when it came to the HOA, or Homeowners Association. The HOA, led by members like Clara, a self-righteous woman with a sense of entitlement, had become more than just an organization that maintained the community. It had turned into a group of people eager to control every aspect of life in the neighborhood. Clara especially seemed to take joy in nitpicking over the smallest of details, whether it was the placement of a mailbox, a flower in the wrong spot, or even a harmless noise in the yard. Her overbearing presence in the neighborhood had made James and his family increasingly uncomfortable. But for now, they managed to keep their distance, hoping to avoid any serious confrontation. Little did they know, the peace they had worked so hard to build would soon be shattered in the most unimaginable way. The days in the neighborhood passed with an undercurrent of unease, as subtle interactions built a quiet but undeniable tension between James' family and Clara. While the streets were lined with beautiful homes and manicured lawns, the atmosphere was far from peaceful. Neighbors had begun whispering about the latest complaints, many of which seemed to stem from Clara's need to control every detail of the community. James had already noticed the way she would glance disapprovingly at his yard when she passed by, or the way she would send notes for minor infractions, sometimes for things as small as a misplaced trash bin or a tree branch hanging too low. But it wasn't until one afternoon, when Clara knocked on his door, that the tension truly came to a head. She had arrived, once again, with a complaint about his front yard. "Your grass is just a little too long," she said with a smirk, trying to appear polite, but clearly relishing the opportunity to assert her authority. James, trying to remain calm, nodded and assured her it would be taken care of, but inside, he felt a wave of frustration building. He had always tried to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation, but Clara's constant judgment was beginning to wear on him. The feeling of being scrutinized at every turn was suffocating, and he couldn't shake the sense that this was just the beginning. Clara didn't care about the small issues. She cared about power, about controlling the people around her. And soon James would learn. Her next move would be far more dangerous than anything he had anticipated. It was a bright and sunny afternoon, the kind of day that usually brought peace to the neighborhood. Sophia, as usual, was outside in the yard, lost in her own little world, playing with her toys and enjoying the calmness of the day. She was always so full of life, despite her struggles. James watched her from the window, a smile on his face as he admired her strength. But as he gazed at her, he noticed something strange. Clara, who had been walking down the street, had stopped in her tracks, staring at Sophia with an unsettling intensity. Her eyes, cold and calculating, followed every move Sophia made. James didn't think much of it at first. After all, people in the neighborhood often looked at Sophia curiously due to her disability. But the longer Clara lingered, the more uncomfortable James became. As the minutes passed, Clara finally made her way toward the house. James opened the door, expecting her usual complaints about something trivial. But this time, her tone was different, more pointed. "Your daughter," she began, her voice laced with condescension. "She's always out here looking so suspicious. She's a burden on this neighborhood." James felt his blood boil, his patience thinning. He tried to remain calm, taking a deep breath before responding. "Sophia is just a child," he said firmly, "and she's not a burden to anyone." But Clara wasn't done. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only James could hear. "You might not see it, but she doesn't belong here. People talk." The words hit him like a slap. He knew that Clara's judgment had crossed the line, but hearing her speak so cruelly about his daughter made his heart ache. The tension in the air was palpable, and despite his best efforts to keep the peace, James could feel the storm brewing. Clara's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time, he truly feared for what this woman might do next. The tension in the neighborhood was becoming impossible to ignore, and Clara's behavior had begun to grow increasingly hostile. It wasn't just the passive-aggressive comments anymore. It was clear that she had something far darker in mind. One afternoon, as James was fixing his car in the driveway, Clara walked up to him with an air of purpose. Her face was tight, her posture rigid, and her eyes narrowed. Without any pleasantries, she cut straight to the point. "Your daughter," she spat, "she's causing trouble in this neighborhood. I've had enough of her." James felt a lump form in his throat, trying to stay composed as Clara's words stung. "Sophia is just playing in her yard," he replied, hoping to diffuse the situation, but Clara was having none of it. She was relentless, her voice rising with every word. "I see her out here all the time, and people are talking. What kind of parent lets their child run wild like that? You're making everyone uncomfortable." The venom in her voice sent a chill down James' spine, and he could see that Clara wasn't just frustrated, she was fixated. This wasn't about a misplaced lawnmower or a noisy dog. It was something much more personal, something far more dangerous. As James tried to respond, to explain that Sophia wasn't a problem, Clara didn't listen. Instead, she took a step closer, her body language becoming more aggressive. Behind her words, James could sense the unspoken threat, as if Clara was pushing him into a corner. As he glanced over at Sophia, who was blissfully unaware, playing in the yard, he felt a rising sense of dread. Something was coming, he could feel it in his bones, and this time, there would be no way to avoid it. It happened faster than James could comprehend. He was standing near the garage, his mind still reeling from the confrontation with Clara just moments before. Sophia was in the yard, playing with her dolls, completely unaware of the rising storm. Clara had left, but there was something in her eyes, something that told James the situation wasn't over. Then he heard footsteps. This time, they weren't the usual slow, deliberate strides of Clara. These steps were quicker, sharper, more aggressive. James turned just in time to see Clara storming back toward him, her face twisted with fury. Before he could speak, she reached into her bag with a movement so swift it took him a moment to process what was happening. A gleaming kitchen knife emerged from her hand, the steel reflecting the sunlight in a way that made James' stomach drop. "Stay away from her," Clara hissed, her voice cold and filled with unhinged rage. She wasn't just angry. She was ready to do something unforgivable. His heart pounded in his chest as he rushed toward Sophia, shouting her name, hoping she would turn around. But all he could think was that this wasn't real. This wasn't happening. Clara, her grip tight on the knife, advanced slowly, her eyes locked on Sophia. The knife was poised, and James knew, if he didn't act fast, the unimaginable could become reality. With all the adrenaline coursing through his veins, he lunged forward, shouting at Clara to stop, to get a hold of herself, but she was beyond reason now. She stepped closer, her movements deliberate and cold, as she raised the knife with malicious intent. Time seemed to slow as James's voice cracked. "Clara, don't." In that split second, panic surged through him, knowing he couldn't let this woman harm his daughter. The chaos that erupted in the yard was deafening. Sophia was screaming, Clara was shouting, and James was struggling to wrestle the knife from her. The tension, the raw terror, felt like it could break him, and as he finally managed to push Clara back, his heart was racing, his hands shaking. He had stopped her, but the damage was done. His worst nightmare had come true. Clara, this woman he had hoped he could reason with, had tried to harm his daughter. The scene had unfolded so quickly, so violently, that it left James breathless, shaken to his core. The consequences of this moment would echo for a long time, and as he held Sophia close, trying to calm her, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The aftermath of the incident weighed heavily on James as he sat in the quiet of his living room, staring blankly at the walls. His mind replayed the horrifying moments when Clara had raised the knife, the sheer terror in Sophia's eyes, and the way his heart had nearly stopped beating as he had watched the scene unfold. Sophia was safe, thank God, but the emotional toll of what had happened was undeniable. It wasn't just about the physical danger, though that was real enough. It was the deep sense of violation, the feeling that their home, the one place they had always thought of as a sanctuary, was no longer safe. That night, as the family gathered around the dinner table, the conversation turned to what had happened and what would come next. James, though still shaken, knew he needed to protect his family from the fallout. The HOA had to be dealt with, and Clara's actions could not go unpunished. But as they talked about the legal implications, the weight of the situation only deepened. What had started as a trivial neighborhood dispute had escalated into something far more serious, and the question loomed over them: what would the neighborhood think of them now? James could see the worry in his wife's eyes and the unease in Sophia's fidgeting hands. They were all trying to process it, but the trauma ran deep. The neighborhood, once a place of quiet community, now felt like a battlefield. As they talked, Sophia spoke softly, almost in disbelief, about how she could no longer trust the people who lived just down the street. "How could anyone want to hurt me, Dad?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion and fear. It was a question James had no answer for, but one that cut him to his core. He could see it in her eyes, the innocence lost, the weight of the world settling on her young shoulders far too soon. The emotional scars would take time to heal, and the trust they once had in their neighbors was now shattered. For James, the fight ahead was not just about justice. It was about restoring the safety and peace his family deserved, no matter the cost. As James sat in his study late into the night, the weight of the situation began to shift from shock to resolve. He needed answers, not just for his own peace of mind, but for Sophia's safety and the well-being of his family. He decided to dig into Clara's past, hoping to find something that could explain her irrational behavior. What he uncovered made his stomach churn. Clara wasn't just a disgruntled HOA member. She had a history of confrontations with other neighbors, many of which had escalated into aggressive encounters. He found several reports of her harassing families who didn't comply with her rigid ideas of how things should be done. One neighbor had even filed a restraining order against her after a particularly heated argument that had turned physical, though Clara had managed to deny the allegations. The more James uncovered, the clearer it became. Clara wasn't just controlling, she was dangerous. Her behavior had been steadily escalating over the years, with each confrontation growing more intense and reckless. James realized that Clara's hostility wasn't something that had just appeared. It was part of a pattern, a dangerous pattern that he now had to confront head-on. Armed with this information, he began to gather evidence, documenting her past actions and reaching out to other neighbors who had been victims of her manipulation and threats. Each story he heard confirmed his worst fears. Clara had been systematically tormenting the people in their community, using her position in the HOA to control and bully those around her. James knew that he couldn't let this continue. The truth had to come out, and he would do whatever it took to ensure that Clara faced the consequences of her actions. What had started as a seemingly harmless neighborhood dispute had now become a personal fight for justice, and James was prepared to see it through, no matter the cost. James had known that confronting the HOA wouldn't be easy, but nothing could have prepared him for the resistance he would face. He walked into the board meeting with a stack of evidence in his hands: emails, complaints from neighbors, and even photographs of Clara's previous confrontations. As soon as he stood before the board, the room grew tense. The HOA members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but none of them seemed eager to take a stand against Clara. James's voice was steady but firm as he laid out the facts. Clara had not only tried to harm his daughter, but had also been bullying and controlling the neighborhood for years. "This isn't just about me or my family anymore," James said, his eyes scanning the room. "This is about ensuring that no one else has to live in fear because of one person's selfish actions." But as he spoke, it became evident that the board was more concerned with maintaining the peace than with holding Clara accountable. Some members seemed to brush off the severity of the situation, suggesting it was just a personal dispute. Others, more quietly, seemed to fear the backlash they might face if they opposed Clara, who had long been a vocal and influential presence in the community. The frustration boiled inside James, but he refused to back down. He had seen how Clara's actions had affected not just his family, but others in the neighborhood as well. Determined to push forward, James reached out to the neighbors who had been silenced for too long, those who had dealt with Clara's harassment and manipulation. Slowly, more and more people came forward, sharing their own stories of how Clara had terrorized them. By the end of the meeting, the HOA was no longer able to ignore the mounting evidence against her. James knew this was only the beginning, but with the support of his neighbors, he now had the power to fight back. As he left the meeting, he felt the weight of the battle ahead, but also a renewed sense of determination. Clara's reign of terror was coming to an end, and he would not stop until justice was served. The confrontation had reached a boiling point. James, now armed with irrefutable evidence of Clara's past behavior, finally confronted her face-to-face in front of the entire neighborhood. The room was tense as he revealed the truth about Clara's manipulations, her past aggressions, and how she had attempted to harm his daughter. Clara's usually confident demeanor began to crack as she tried to justify her actions, claiming she had only been trying to keep order in the neighborhood. Her words, however, only exposed the depth of her delusion. She spoke with such conviction, her eyes wild, as though she truly believed her behavior had been justified. But the more she spoke, the more her facade unraveled. The neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out now openly criticized her, recalling the countless times she had used her position to intimidate others. The truth was too much for Clara to bear. She began to stammer, her once calm voice now quivering with desperation. Her control over the neighborhood was slipping, and she knew it. The room was no longer filled with fear, but with a sense of powerlessness for Clara. She tried to maintain her composure, but it was clear she had lost the support she once held over the community. As the neighbors closed in, demanding answers, Clara's behavior grew more erratic. She snapped at everyone around her, her insults growing louder and more disconnected from reality. In the midst of the chaos, James made the decision to call the police. The moment he dialed, Clara's demeanor shifted entirely. The reality of the situation finally hit her. Her actions were not just being judged, they were now being documented by the authorities. She started to panic, her movements becoming frantic as she realized that the web of lies she had woven was about to collapse completely. As the sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of the police, Clara's breakdown was in full swing. She was no longer the powerful figure she had once been. She was just a woman caught in the consequences of her own delusions. The control she had once held over the neighborhood was gone, and with it, her ability to keep her facade intact. As the video draws to a close, James stands in front of the camera, his expression sincere and resolute. "Thank you for sticking with us through this journey," he says, his voice filled with emotion. "What happened to our family and to others in our neighborhood should never have happened, but we stood up and together we were able to make our voices heard. This story isn't just ours. It's a reminder that we all have the power to fight for justice, to protect those we love, and to stand against wrongdoings no matter how big or small. If you've been through something similar, know that you are not alone. Please share this video, spread the word, and subscribe for more updates. Let's continue to support each other and create safer, stronger communities. If you're facing your own battle, remember, you have the strength to stand up and fight back. Together, we can make a difference." With a final nod, James gestures for viewers to like, comment, and subscribe as the screen fades to black.